Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Marked twice, loved once. Episode 16. Chapter 176. Nora's POV. I was in the room, pacing around worrying about Madison, who had left home yesterday afternoon. He told me had something important to do and would be back soon, only to make a mind link to me later telling me something important came up, and he wouldn't be back home that night. I had no idea what was going on, and it was worrying me a lot, making me wonder if anything had happened to him. I tried to connect to him again, but he kept telling me he was busy, and he would talk to me later. I would have thought he was doing something wrong, but I couldn't feel anything from my wolf, which made me believe that he had done nothing wrong, and he was probably all right, but what kept him out so long? I was still busy, thinking about him and where he might be, when I heard his voice in my head and my eyes widened. "Madison? Where are you?" I asked worriedly, my heart racing with both excitement and relief that he finally reached out to me. "I'm at the beach house, Nora. Can you come meet me there?" he asked, and I frowned. The beach house wasn't inside the mansion, but it wasn't far away from the mansion either, which meant he could have returned home last night instead of staying in the beach house. Something must have happened, but what was it? Was it Laura's issue again? Did she do something again or? Oh, no. She must have uploaded the pictures online before Madison got there. Maybe he was hiding so that no one would see him or ask him any questions. "What's going on, Madison? You can talk to me, you know this, right?" I asked, hoping he would open up to me because thinking about it deeply, I realized my first assumption couldn't be right. If truly she had uploaded it, I would have seen it online, or maybe reporters and pack members would have flooded our mansion, seeking for explanation, but none of that had happened yet, which could only mean that the pictures weren't uploaded, but I was still worried. "I can't explain to you on the phone, but I would appreciate it if you could come meet me at the beach house right now. It's urgent, please," he urged, and I became extremely worried. I was scared of the unknown, and I didn't know what to do. "Meet me there, okay?" he said, but all I could do was nod my head as the connection ended. I looked around me, thinking of what to do or how I would get to the house quicker, and that was when I saw the car keys in the drawer. I picked up one of the car keys and ran outside the room. "Mom!" I heard Julius's soft voice in front of his room and I ran toward him. "Where are you going to, Mum?" he asked, and I sighed. "I need to follow your dad to somewhere. I will be back soon," I said hurriedly, but he frowned. "Dad to somewhere? Where to? Have you forgotten that Dad hasn't returned since yesterday?" he asked, and I sighed. I looked at the steps that were desperately calling at me and I sighed again. "Dad is waiting for me somewhere, and I have to go and meet him immediately. We can't keep Daddy waiting for too long, okay?" I said to him, and he nodded. "Okay, Mum. You should return with Dad later, okay?" he said, and I smiled before kissing his forehead. With that being settled, I ran down the stairs, took a car, and drove out of the mansion. I drove to the beach house and parked roughly in front of it. I didn't even close the car door as I ran toward the house to see him. I entered the building and the first place I checked was the sitting room, but he wasn't there and my heart sank. "Madison! Lord Madison!" I called as I ran around the sitting room, searching for him. I ran to the kitchen and shouted again, "Madison! Madison! Madison!" But he didn't reply to me, and my fear increased. I ran toward the guest room that was closest to the sitting room and entered, but it was empty, and before I knew it, I was staggering backward and fear was overwhelming my being. I'm here. I heard the sweet voice in my mind and for a moment, I felt like all my problems had been washed away. I closed my eyes and opened it again. Where are you, Madison? I questioned with bated breath. His voice was calm and cool, so much so that it made me feel like he was all right and nothing had happened to him. I'm in the room, upstairs, he said, and I sighed. I ran toward the stairs, climbed them, and followed his scent to the room he was in. I opened the door and my eyes widened when I saw what was in front of me. On the floor were roses and at the center of the room was a table filled with lots of drinks, wines, different kinds of food, a big blue cake, and flowers, which were my favorite. I covered my mouth as I stepped into the room. I had no idea what was going on, and I was confused. I took my eyes away from the beautifully decorated room and looked at Madison, who was sitting on a seat beside the table. Madison, I called softly, looking at him as my eyes asked him thousands of questions, but he only stared at me and stood up. He walked toward me and grabbed my waist. I'm here, waiting for you, my Nora, he said to me and captured my lips with his. I was still surprised, but I kissed him back, and we kissed for a while before he pulled away and kissed my cheeks. I looked at the room one more time and turned to look at Madison. What? Who? Why? How? I had no idea how to phrase my words, as I was totally confused and bewildered by everything that was happening. Come with me, Madison replied without answering my questions, and he held my hand. He took me to the table and pulled out a seat where he made me sit, and he stood beside me, staring into my eyes. It's over, Nora, he professed, and my eyes twitched. Over? What's over? Our relationship? Our friends with benefits lifestyle or what? My heart was racing, but I kept my cool and waited for him to reply to me. The issue with Laura has been sorted, he said, and I gasped. I covered my mouth to stop myself from screaming out of excitement, but it was too hard to keep my excitement down, and I threw my head back to laugh. How? How were you able to sort it? I asked. If there was one thing I was sure about, then it was that Madison would not be her donor for surrogacy and return to me like this, celebrating that with me again. I was in my room yesterday, thinking of what to do, when my mother came to meet me, and she asked me what happened. I explained to her everything that happened, and she left the room only to return with a laptop. I thought her action was funny until she showed me some pictures and videos of my father and Laura dating, making out, and doing all sorts of dirty things a few years ago. He explained and my eyes widened. I was disgusted and I felt irritated. Madison's father had died a while back. If he and Laura were dating before he died, it meant Laura was dating an old man when she was just a young youth. What a slut! I wanted to spit on her face and hit her hard on the nose, but what was even more confusing was how Madison's mother knew about it all and even kept pictures and videos, and she didn't say anything until then. How did Mother know about all that? I asked and he sighed. She said she caught them and to create evidence, she took pictures and videos of each time she caught them. He explained, and my heart broke for her. So, she kept such a painful memory to herself all through those years? It must have been hell. I mumbled and he nodded. She had it hard. I feel sorry that I blamed her all along when my father was the jerk who betrayed her and broke her heart. She is a strong woman, he replied, and I could see the sadness in his eyes which disappeared in the next seconds. So, I took the pictures and videos to Laura, and with that, I was able to solve the issue, collect all the pictures and videos from her, and warn her to stay away from me if she doesn't want me to ruin her. We are free now, Nora, he said to me, and I was excited. I jumped up from the seat and hugged him tight. This is great. This is very wonderful. The moon goddess has come to our aid and made our life easier. She had done it for us. I kept saying as I hugged him, not wanting to break free from him as my happiness knew no bounds. Yeah, Nora. It's all over now, he said, and I nodded. I stayed in his arms for a while, but I later smiled and broke free. I wiped the single tear that rolled down my eyes and looked around the room again. That was when I sighted a right up on the bed and I frowned. I looked at it properly, wiped my eyes, and looked at the bed again, and my lips curved into a big smile as I read out what was on the bed. Please, forgive me, Nora. I'm sorry. I read, and my eyes reddened, my eyes became moist with tears as I turned around to look at him only to see him on his knees. No, don't. I tried to make him stand, but he shook his head and remained kneeling. It's only right for me to kneel like this, Nora. I'm so happy to have you in my life, and I want to use the medium to show you how sorry I am for all I've done to you. I've hurt you several times and I feel so sorry. I'm sorry for not trusting you even though you've always been loyal to me. I'm sorry for almost killing our baby then, and I'm sorry for not realizing how much you loved me earlier. You know I wouldn't have hurt you if I was in my right senses. I'm so sorry I did all that to you and caused you so much pain. I'm sorry for making you cry so much, and I'm sorry I made you lonely for so many years because of my mistake. I should have done better. I should have treated you better, but I keep up. I'm so sorry. He apologized and tears rolled down my eyes. I sucked in a deep breath and knelt in front of him. I'm sorry too. I'm so sorry for keeping your son away from you all these years, and I'm sorry for all I did to hurt you too. I apologized and we hugged each other. We hugged for a moment before he pulled away and placed a kiss on my forehead. I love you so much, my love, he said, and I blushed. I love you too, my lord, I responded, and we both chuckled. We should go and eat, Madison said to me, and I nodded. We both walked to the table and sat down. We ate in silence for a while, and when we were about to be done, he looked at me and smiled. Julius must be worried about me, waiting for me since yesterday. When we are done eating, we should go home, he said, but I raised a brow and shook my head. Home? Says who? I asked, and he looked at me. He seemed confused. What do you mean? He asked, and I laughed coyly. I mean, we can't come all the way here, eat, and leave. Not even after I saw these roses, the white soft bed, and a young hot man standing strong in front of me. I said seductively and winked at him, and he chuckled. Alpha Leo's POV. Ava and I hadn't said a word to each other since the confrontation that took place in the afternoon. I was mad and disappointed at her, but for some reason, she was too, which made me wonder what she was thinking and what right she had to be angry when she was the one at fault. I even wondered if it was wrong of me to question her about it when she was my mate, but I was sure about my rights and I knew I had done nothing wrong. Should I just go through with rejection? Ava doesn't love me, and I'm not sure I will ever love her either. We are supposed to be mates, but we ain't feeling the bond at all. What's going on? I asked Ethan, hoping he would support me to go through with the rejection and do away with Ava. No, Leo. You can do that. She is your mate, and you shouldn't reject her like this. I'm sure the moon goddess has something in plan for us, and it's going to be all right, okay? He said to me, and I frowned. I wasn't okay with Ava at all. Her moves, her every word, her every action frustrated me and made me wonder why she would be my second chance mate when there are a lot of people out there. I sighed and sat in bed. I was tired, so I needed a sleep to calm my mind. I was about to rest my head when I saw her lying behind me and I groaned. It didn't feel right, but I had no choice. I laid behind her and covered myself with a duvet. I closed my eyes with the thought that I would fall asleep soon until I heard a voice in my head and I frowned. Alpha Leo, please return to the mansion now. We need your presence, please. It's urgent. It was my beta's voice, and I was confused. I sat up in bed. What do you mean? What's going on? I asked, hoping to get some words out of his mouth to have an idea of what was going on in the pack. It's bad, Alpha Leo. Please come back and attend to this. He said, and with that, he ended the conversation, and I was bothered. I looked around the room for a few seconds before I climbed down and tapped Ava's shoulder. I know you are not sleeping. Can you take me to the pack? I need to be there in minutes. I said to her while making sure to let the urgency of the situation show in my voice after she refused to respond to my tap on her shoulder. So, you can talk to me when you need my help? I thought we would never speak to each other again. She asked and I grunted. Not now, Ava. I have to be in the pack, and it's urgent. I said, pleading with her urgently. You don't use that tone when asking for help, do you? She asked and my blood boiled. I clenched my fist and groaned. She was annoying me, and I was already losing my cool, but I still decided to be calm with her and speak to her calmly. Okay, please take me home. I need to attend to something. I said in between my anger and she smiled. She sat up from the bed and walked toward her closet. I should change first. Give me 10 minutes to change. She said, and that was when I lost it all. Stop, Ava. I told you something urgent came up in my pack and I don't have any minutes to waste. What are you doing now? You don't need to change, you can just take me to my room and return here. No one would see you, please. Although I was pissed, I still made sure to plead with her, so she would understand how much I had to be home at that moment, but heck. It was a lie. She crossed her arms and rested her back on the wall. I don't want to. I won't take you there. You don't shout at people when you need their help. She said and I frowned. Why this? Stop playing, Ava. I believe you understand the urgency of this matter, and you know I have to be in my pack soon. Why are you doing this to me, Ava? I asked, frustration obvious in my voice as I looked at her. She scoffed and rolled her eyes. I'm not going. You can find your way there if you want, but I'm not leaving my room. She said, and I sat back in the bed. There was no way I could go to the airport so late at night and arrive in California before daybreak. Even if I decided to use my private jet, it wouldn't be helpful in the end. I was cornered, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do in a situation like that. I stood up from the bed and ran my fingers through my hair. Whatever, I mumbled out loud and walked toward Ava. Please, Ava. Don't do this to me. You know, I'm sorry about what happened in the afternoon. I shouldn't have asked you about it at all, in fact, I should have ignored it and acted as if I didn't see it at all. Just take me home, please. I pleaded with her, but she was still adamant about not going. I was angry, frustrated, and worried, but I couldn't stop pleading with her and after wasting my time for more than 30 minutes, she decided to take me home. Thank you, I said to her, and she held my hand. Without saying a word, we both teleported from her room, and by the time I opened my eyes, I was already in my room and the first thing I did was run out of the room as I could perceive the scent of my men downstairs. Where are you going? Ava asked, but I ignored her and left her in the room. I climbed down the stairs and got to the sitting room in no time. "Welcome, Alpha Leo." They all greeted me, but one thing was common on their faces, and it was worry, which made me very concerned about what must have happened and if I wasn't too late already, or maybe it was my absence that made whatever happened that way. "Tell me everything," I said to them, and my beta stood up. He bowed his head and sighed. "Remember the rogues you attacked then?" he asked, and I nodded. "What did the situation have to do with them?" I remembered burning a few of them years ago, but that was all. "Yes?" I asked as I waited curiously for his reply. "They've returned, Alpha Leo. They've returned powerfully, and maybe they are back for revenge," he said, and I frowned. War wasn't good, and I would love to avoid it if I could, but in a situation like this where there was no way to reject it, I would gladly go for the war, vent out my frustration on the rogues, and put an end to them. But then, was that why my men were worried? About the rogue, or about the fact that they might not conquer them? It confused me, and I knew it couldn't be so. I knew the men I had with me, and I knew how strong they were. I also knew they weren't the type to run away from wars. "Okay," I replied, signaling for him to continue. "They kidnapped some of our pack members. We were trying to track them down to rescue the members they kidnapped when we heard that they'd kidnapped Lady Christabel too, and we have no idea where they took them to or what they plan to do after this," he reported, and my eyes widened. "They did not only capture my pack members but my mother too." It was a big problem for me, and I was already feeling the increase in the rate my heart was beating. How were they able to do that? Did they come to the mansion? I questioned because I believed that was the only way they could get my mother, who hated to leave home, and if that was the case then my men would have to pay for it because they were supposed to protect the mansion at all costs and make sure no one comes in anyhow. "No, Alpha Leo. I guess they tracked her down and kidnapped her when she went out shopping. They must have been following her for long," he replied, and my heart sank. I slammed my fist on the table and gritted my teeth. Why was everything going wrong these days? Did I really offend some goddess who wouldn't stop until they punished me? Gather the pack's trackers and make them find out the location of those rogues. But make sure they don't attack until they report to me first. I will settle everything after that," I said to them, and they agreed with me. We ended the meeting there as they needed to act fast and there was no time to waste at all. I watched them leave the sitting room and I grunted. I paced around the sitting room for a few minutes before I walked toward the bar, picked a drink, and started drinking while thinking about how my mother and other pack members would be faring in the rogues' camp at the moment. I was still drinking and hoping everything would be all right with them, and they would return to me alive when I heard footsteps on the stairs, but I need not turn to look to find out who it was. "What's happening? Any problem?" she asked, and I rolled my eyes. Her voice alone was enough to piss me off, but I wasn't in the mood to talk to her. "I'm your mate and I think I deserve to know whatever is happening to you. Don't I?" she asked, and I closed my eyes. I gritted my teeth and dropped the cup with a long bang. "Can you just stay quiet? Why do you like to act like a peesh?" I yelled at her, and before I could say another word, I saw her eyes widen and she teleported. Alpha Leo's POV. I was in the sitting room, waiting for the men who left hours ago to return, while I sipped my coffee with a messed up mind. Ava hadn't returned after she left angrily, but she was the last thing on my mind at the moment as I was worried about the safety of my mother and the other pack members that were kidnapped. I stood up and walked around the table. I was about to sit back in my seat when I felt some presence in the room and I turned my head to see my beta and other men entering the sitting room. "How was it?" I asked, and it was my beta that moved forward. He bowed his head and sighed. It was fruitful, Alpha Leo. We were able to find out their base, but the security was too tight as vampires were involved too. They had the backup of some vampires. He explained, and I let out a deep breath. If it was only the vampires, then there was no problem. That's not a problem. I can burn down all their houses with my ability alone, so that's not going to be a problem at all. The problem now is our people. Are they inside the base? I asked, and he nodded. Yes. They are there, and what I'm suggesting is that we burn down the whole place. Lady Catherine is strong enough to endure until we save her, and I'm certain that I will be able to save her. The pack members there are only 10, so it will be easier to just burn everything down instead of going on a full-string war. He advised, but I knew that wasn't for me because it wasn't my way. I would never do that to my people. I sat back in my seat and sipped my drink again. You said only 10 members were kidnapped? I asked. Yes, Alpha Leo. I'm sure they will understand why we have to make this decision too, and again, they have their family members here, and they know very well how much damage war could do to a pack. His claim was reasonable, and it was what most packs would have done, but it just wasn't sitting well with me, and it wasn't something I could do. I shook my head and looked at him. Even if they are just 2 pack members, they are still my people, and I can't let them die that way. I have to protect them. I said to him, and he lowered his head. It was obvious that he wasn't pleased with my decision, and he wanted to say more, but he knew I wouldn't change my mind either. How could I let my people die that way when I could plan something and take them out of there alive? I felt like if I let these 10 people go, I might lose every other member of the pack because I would keep giving up on them, thinking it was the right choice until I would lose them all. I was about to continue addressing him when I felt a familiar presence, and I turned my head to see who it was, but my eyes widened the moment I set my eyes on her. I stood up from my seat and walked toward her. Cynthia! I called excitedly and hugged her. She hugged me tight and laughed. It's surprising seeing you here like this. Why are you here? I asked, still keeping a bright smile on my face. It was good to see her, really. She smiled. Yeah, I heard about what happened to Godmother. After hearing such a thing, there was no way I could keep quiet and act as if nothing had happened. I'm here because of that. She explained, and her expression changed, the same as mine. I sucked in a deep breath and walked back to my seat before I turned to her again. Yeah, that was what I heard too. I was out on a business and I returned to the news of my members being kidnapped by some lowlives. I explained to her, and she walked over to me. She crossed her arms as she stared at me with a worried-filled gaze. Who do you think did this? Is it the vampires? She asked. She was already angry too, and I knew it. I shook my head. It's not the vampires. It's some rogues that I taught a lesson a few years ago. I didn't expect them to return like this, but they did, and it seems they are out for revenge. I said to her, and she sighed. She seemed to be thinking about something as she stared at the floor without saying anything for a while. I sat down in my seat while I waited for her to tell me whatever she was thinking, as what I needed the most at the moment were ideas. I needed ideas to make a good plan to rescue those members they kidnapped and my mother. She continued staring at the ground for a little longer before she raised her head and looked at me. What about Mind Link? Have you tried connecting with her through the Mind Link? She asked, and I nodded. I had done that several times, but it wasn't working, and it seemed like something was stopping us from reaching each other. I've tried that, but it's not connecting. I think they've put a choker around her neck to stop her from using any ability. I explained, and her face fell, but it seemed she still had other questions to ask. I nodded my head, indicating for her to ask away, and she was about to talk when Ava appeared beside us and I let out a deep breath. I turned to look at her, and the look in her eyes made me wonder if she was high on something. She was looking at me so intensely like I was a cheat, and it was annoying. "Ava, you're here?" I asked, trying to make her return to how she was without creating a scene in front of my men. "Who is this?" This was the question she replied to me with, and my anger boiled. Her tone was so rude and unreserved that I felt like bundling her out of the room, but I kept my calm and closed my eyes to refrain myself from insulting her. "And why do you want to know?" I replied coldly, and that was when her expression changed. "Because I'm your mate and I have the right to know the people around you." "Is that too wrong to ask?" she asked with disgust in her tone, and I was infuriated. I opened my mouth to talk. I wanted to yell at her and also make her realize that she shouldn't be asking such a rude question in front of a stranger, but before I could talk, Cynthia already moved closer to her and bowed her head with a big smile on her face. "So, you are his mate? It's so good to see you. I'm so happy that you're here right now. I didn't expect you to be this pretty." She appreciated Ava, and with the expression on her face, she seemed to be sincere with her words. Also, the Cynthia I knew wasn't the type that hurt people, and I knew this. Ava looked at her stretched hand for a while and eyed Cynthia. Without accepting the handshake, she turned to face me again and demanded, "Who is she?" I had finally lost my cool and my anger had surged. If this is how all mates do, then, no alpha will want to have a mate ever again in their life. You claim to be my mate, but you don't even know when you are supposed to help me out and when you don't need to? Right now, you don't even know what's happening and all you can do is come here to start ranting. You've gone overboard, Ava. How could you call yourself my mate like this?" I asked with anger-filled voice. I felt annoyed, and I had lost my patience completely. I knew she had no feelings for me, but she could at least act like she cared. I still remember how I had to plead with her before she brought me to the mansion even after I told her it was urgent, and I still felt guilty that I left my mother and my pack to stay with her. Although I knew it wasn't my fault, I still felt guilty, but all she could do was frustrate my life. Cynthia moved closer to me and started patting my back gently. "Please be calm. We can't have you lose control of your ability right now, please." Cynthia tried to ease my mood, but before we knew it, Ava had pushed her away from my view, and she was standing there. "Get away from this place. You don't have any right to touch my man. He is mine, and I'm the only one that can touch him," she said viciously, and Cynthia was shocked. Alpha Leo's POV. I was shocked by the way Ava pushed her away and my mouth hung open. I looked at her and cringed inwardly. "Are you okay?" I asked, and she nodded. "Yes, I am," she replied and sighed. Thank goodness she was strong on her feet, so she was able to stop herself from falling and was standing as if nothing had happened. But she wouldn't stop staring at Ava with shock in her eyes, and I knew she had a lot of questions for me. I stormed over to Ava's side and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward me. I stared straight into her eyes. "What do you think you're doing? Is that how you treat someone you don't know?" I asked with anger in my tone, but Ava wasn't moved at all. She looked back into my eyes and sneered. "Wow, she's just someone I don't know? Who is she to you?" she questioned, and I frowned. I knew she wasn't jealous because why would she get jealous when she had no feelings for me? It was obvious she was doing this to annoy me, and if that was really the case, she was winning already, as I was losing my cool by the second. "She is a sister to me. She's my mom's goddaughter, and she's here because she heard about the disappearance of my mom. She's here to help me find her. Can you just think well before ranting? What do you think you're doing? I asked her, still staring at her with anger in my eyes. She was quiet for a while, but it was obvious that she didn't believe me, and she was staring at me as if I was a liar. She removed her arm from my grips and shook her head. You're a liar. Why would your sister touch you that way when she doesn't have any feelings for you? You both are liars, she said to me, and before I could say another word, she had already disappeared. I stared at the spot she was a few seconds ago and took a deep breath. I was expecting her to ask about my mother and volunteer to help me search for her, but all she cared about was her ego, and in the end, she didn't care about my mother at all. Are you okay? Cynthia asked with a worried voice. She must have noticed the look in my eyes, and it worried her. I raised my eyes and shrugged as I forced a smile. Yeah, I replied and walked back to her. Is this how she always acts, or is something wrong with her? She asked, and I smiled bitterly. It's complicated, Cynthia. That was all I could say to her, as I had no idea where to start, and everything was already confusing. I walked over to a seat and sat down. When did you meet her? Cynthia asked. It's been years, but it was just friendship. I only found out recently that she's my mate, but I don't want to talk about it. It's complicated, Cynthia, I said to her, and she sighed. All I want to do now is find my mother and other pack members who were kidnapped. We need to think of a way to get them out of there alive and not as corpses. I know a way to put an end to the rogues, but that will affect the kidnapped ones too, and I don't want that, I explained to her, and she seemed to understand as we both went quiet for a while. I was thinking of a way to rescue my people without hurting them and also be able to eliminate those rogues so they wouldn't return to our lives anymore. While I was lost in thought, Cynthia cleared her throat to get my attention. I raised my eyes to look at her. Given the way that Lady teleported away, it's obvious she has the gift of teleportation, right? She asked, and I nodded but didn't understand where she was going with this. So, I'm thinking, why don't we ask her to teleport there, check for their hideouts, and come back to tell us? It might be too difficult for her to do it alone, so I will go with her. You know I have the gift of invisibility, right? I can make myself invisible, making it easier to go in unnoticed. With that, we could rescue the kidnapped people and my godmother too, she explained, and my eyes widened. It was indeed a brilliant idea that got me nodding and smiling. While we rescue them, you can burn down the whole base. That way, we can return the victims and put an end to the rogues at the same time. You, me, and that lady can do this alone without the help of others. Isn't that good? She asked, and I smiled. It was a nice plan that would work well if executed meticulously, but the problem was that Ava might not agree to it, especially with how angry she was with me. That's a great plan. I'll go ask Ava if she can help first, I said, and Cynthia laughed. Why would she say no to helping when it's about your mother? I'm sure she'll want to help even without being asked, she said, and I realized she was right. She should help because it concerned my mother. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. I'm not sure if she'll be upstairs, but I want to check first, I said and started climbing the steps. I tried to make a mind link with Ava, but she wasn't responding, and I sighed. I walked to my room, opened the door, and my eyes lit up when I saw her sitting on the bed. I entered the room and revealed a smile. You're here, I said, and she stood up. She walked toward me and stood in front of me. What was the meaning of what you did earlier? Did you think it made any sense at all? You shouted at me in front of that girl down there, the same way you shouted at me when your men were there earlier too. How do you expect them to respect me if you keep treating me that way? Wait, do you think I've become someone you can treat however you want just because we're mates? She asked, and I frowned. I knew she would bring this up, but I didn't expect it the moment she saw me. I wasn't in the room for this, and every second wasted felt like a year because my mother was in danger. See, Ava, she interrupted me. You keep insulting me and embarrassing me every time. Do you even have any feelings for me, or are you still sulking that Nora isn't yours? Just tell me. Let me know what you're thinking because it's obvious you don't want me in your life. She yelled, and my frown deepened. I was frustrated. I moved closer to her and tried to hold her hand, but she pushed me away and continued accusing me of silly and unreasonable things. Listen, Ava. I'm sorry for whatever happened earlier, but let's talk about this later, okay? I'm here to ask for your help concerning my mother's case, I said to her, hoping that would change her mind and make her calm down so she would listen to me and help me out, but I guess I assumed too far. She scoffed and took a step back. You think I would help? Why would I do that after all you did to me? I'm not going to help you, and you can go to hell. You all can go to hell. She shouted, and before I could say anything else to her, she teleported away, leaving me in my room. I was shocked. I didn't believe she could do that to me. I even mentioned to her that it was about my mom, but she still did not talk about the matter. Instead of drowning in disappointment, I decided to return downstairs so I could plan everything again and rescue my people as fast as possible. I walked out of the room and returned to Cynthia, who was waiting for me impatiently. She rushed to me and asked me, "What did she say? Will she help?" She asked, and I shook my head. She won't. Let's make do with other men on the ground. I will go to her to ask for rejection after this, I said and asked one of the guards in the room to call some of my men for me. A few minutes later, they all walked into the sitting room and assembled in front of me. We are going to the rogues' base to release our people. I want you all to go and prepare. I will be giving you 5 minutes to do that, I said to them and dismissed them. Cynthia walked up to me, and she looked worried. Alpha Leo, what are you planning to do? She asked, and I smiled, though it was bitter and weak. We will go with the same plan you made earlier but without Ava. You and I will enter instead, I replied to her, and her eyes widened. I can become invisible and escape, but you can't do that. This is too dangerous, Alpha Leo, she said, and I nodded my head. I know, but we've got no choice, I said and turned to leave but turned to face her again. I want to quickly change so we can head out, I said and rushed to my room. I opened the door to my room, entered, and started pacing around. I knew the gravity of what I wanted to do, but I had no choice. It would have been better if Ava could help, but she wouldn't and there was nothing I could do about it. I walked over to my bed and sat on it. I made a mind link to Madison who replied immediately. Madison, I called. Yes, Leo. This is great. Nora and I were talking about you, and we decided to come and spend the holiday at your side. Hope you're free. He asked, and my heart sank. How sweet would it have been to have them around? I shook my head and let out a deep breath. Not now, Madison. Something came up that I have to solve, but I don't know what might happen. I can't say exactly what might happen there, but whatever happens, I want you to please take care of this pack for me. I want you to guide my pack and treat it as your own, please, I pleaded, and I could imagine how confused he would be. "What do you mean, Leo?" he asked. "Don't worry," I said to him and ended the mind link. I changed my clothes and left the room. It was time to leave for the mini-war that would probably take my life. Alpha Leo's POV. I walked downstairs and met my beta and Cynthia. The two were patiently waiting for me to return, and with the look on their faces, it was obvious they were prepared too. "How many warriors did you assemble?" I asked my beta, Jason, who had his head bowed the moment he saw me. "Just 50 men, Alpha Leo, but I can assure you that they are the best of our warriors," he said, and I nodded. I turned to look at Cynthia, who noodles at me, and I returned my attention to Jason. "Reduce the men to 30. I don't want too much of a crowd, and I don't think we should get noticed either. It would even be better that way because Cynthia and I are already forced to reckon with, and with you, we can do anything," I said to him, but the two immediately got worried. They glanced at each other and returned their gaze to me. "Alpha Leo, don't you think 30 men are too few? We don't even know how many men we will encounter there. We don't know how powerful they will be, either. I don't think bringing 30 men with us is a good plan at all," he tried to convince me. But no, I had made up my mind. "No, don't worry about that. We will sort everything out, and it will be fine," I said to him. Without waiting for Cynthia to say a word, I walked toward my car. "I will be driving Cynthia and me. You all can take the van," I said to them before entering the car. I waited for Cynthia to enter too before I started the car and drove out of the mansion, while they followed me. We were on our way when Cynthia turned to face me and cleared her throat. "Alpha Leo, are you all right?" she asked, and I sighed. She must have noticed that I was troubled and looking uneasy. That was true, as my mind wasn't at rest at all. I was sweating profusely, and my heart wouldn't stop racing. I don't know if I am or not. I feel like something terrible will happen there today, and I can't be at peace with that playing on my mind, I replied to her and sighed. I didn't want to scare her, discourage her, or make her see me as a coward. But, I just decided to let her know what was happening to me, as I was very troubled. She let out a deep breath and held my free hand. "It's okay, Alpha Leo. I'm sure that's just you worrying about your pack members, and all will be all right. We will eliminate all those stupid rogues and return home with our people. We will try our best to make sure that we don't lose anyone. You are strong, Alpha Leo, and with you beside me, I feel like I can conquer the world because that's how much I rate your strength," she comforted, and I smiled. Somehow, her words made me relax, and the uneasy feeling in my heart seemed to die down a little. "Thank you, Cynthia," I said to her, and she smiled too. I continued driving for a little while longer, and before long, we got closer to the base. We need to park a bit far away from their base so they don't notice our car. You know vampires are with them, and they can hear sounds very well, Cynthia advised, and I agreed. She was right, and we needed to be very careful, especially because of the vampires that were around. "You're right," I replied and drove a bit more before parking my car. I made a mind link with Jason too. "Stop right behind me when I stop and bring the men discreetly. We can't have them notice us at all, okay?" I instructed. "Okay, Alpha Leo. I will do as you said," he replied, and with that, the mind link ended. I stepped out of the car, and Cynthia did the same. We looked at each other and nodded. She walked over to my side and held my hand. "I'm going to make us invisible now so we can get there without being found," she said to me, and we started walking. I looked down at my hand, but it was clear, and I frowned. Are we invisible now? I questioned, and she smiled. Yes, no one can see us, she replied, and we both continued walking toward the direction of the base. We arrived there quickly, but there was no way to enter as the gate was locked from inside. I guess we will have to wait for someone to come out of there, I said to her, and she sighed. How long do we have to do that? We don't even know if anyone would come out of there today, she lamented. I turned to look at her and revealed a forced smile. We don't have a choice, Cynthia, I replied, and she sucked in a deep breath. If Ava were here, it would have been a piece of cake, but she said she wouldn't help. She knew this was the moment I needed her the most, and she refused to help me, leaving me to solve everything the hardest way. We waited patiently in front of the gate. We expected that we would wait for an hour or two before the gate would open, but the moon goddess seemed to be on our side, as the gate opened, and a man came out. We need to rush in, I said to Cynthia, who nodded, and we both ran into the building before the man could close the gate. We walked around the mansion, searching for my people, but they were nowhere to be found. There were so many guards around guarding the place, but none of them seemed to notice us, which made the whole thing funny to me. We continued searching around until I caught my mother's scent, and my eyes widened. That way, my mother is there, I said to her, and she was shocked too. She is? She asked, and I nodded. She is. Let's go. We followed the scent and arrived in front of a room. I tried to open the door, but it was locked, and I groaned. It's locked again. My mum is inside, but there is no way we can enter because it's locked, I said to her, and she grunted too. What are we going to do now? She asked, but I had no idea either. 3 men were guarding the room, and I was sure the key would be on them. While I was thinking of what to do, an idea suddenly popped up in my head, and I smiled. I will try to attack those men without making a noise, I said to Cynthia, who immediately shook her head. No, you can't do that. There is no way you can attack 3 of them without others noticing, she said, but I was sure of my skills. I smiled at her, and before she could say another word, I ran toward the men and hit them at the back of their heads, making them fall noiselessly to the ground. I did it, I said to her, and she raised a thumb for me. I chuckled before I bent down to check the man's pocket for the key, and fortunately, or maybe as expected, I found the key and couldn't be happier. I turned to face Cynthia, who was just as happy as I was, and nodded at her. I opened the door, and inside the room were my mother and other pack members who were kidnapped. We need to bring them all out, but I don't think that will be possible. I don't know how many people Cynthia could take at a time, but it would have been easier if Ava were here. She would have taken 2, and Cynthia would have taken the ones she could carry too. With that, in a few seconds, we would be out of there. The plan would have gone smoothly if she had agreed to help me, but she just had to act all silly when I needed her help, I said out loud as anger filled my veins. I don't think this is the time to think about Ava, Leo. We need to get out of here as soon as possible, Ethan advised me, and I sighed. I turned to look at Cynthia. How many people can you take at once? I asked. 2. 1 with each hand, she replied, and I let out a deep breath. I had expected that answer to begin with. I released her hand, and like that, I became visible to the people in the room. Leo. My mother was the first to notice me, and she called my name immediately. The pack members also bowed their heads, but I was sure it would be hard for them to believe their eyes. I don't want any of you to say a word. We need to get you out of here before those scoundrels find out, I said, and I was glad they all understood. Take my mother and one of them out of here first, I said to Cynthia, who looked at me with confusion in her eyes. Why not you and godmother first? She questioned, but I shook my head. No, I have to stay back and protect these people. You should leave quickly, I said, and she nodded. She took my mother and one other pack member, and they left the room. She returned a few minutes later and appeared in front of me. I've given them to your men. Let's go, she said and took another 2. She left with them, and she continued that way until the numbers reduced significantly. I will take these 2 and come back for you, Cynthia promised me before she left the room. While I was waiting for her, I noticed someone coming into the room, and I unleashed my power. I burned down the door and was about to burn the person when I felt a pain in my shoulder. When I looked down to see what it was, I realized it was an arrow. An arrow had been shot at me. When I looked up, I saw the rogue with a bow in his hand. I grunted and wanted to pull out the arrow, but it was poisoned, and the poison was already running through my body system. I looked at the rogues who had increased in front of me and were about to attack me. Am I going to die here, Ethan? I asked Ethan, but before he could reply, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I raised my head to see who it was, only to see that it was Cynthia. We need to leave. I can still take you out of here, she said to me, but I knew that wouldn't be possible because even if we were invisible, I still needed to walk with my legs, and I was already very weak as the poison was already affecting my body. Let's go, please. She begged, but I couldn't. No, Cynthia. Stay away. I will burn these people and join you, I said to her, but she shook her head. No, Alpha Leo. There is no way I will leave you alone here. We have to go back together because we came together, she said. I will join you outside. I won't die here, I promised her, and her eyes lit up. Is that a promise? She asked, and I nodded. You mustn't forget, and you must come out, okay? She asked, and I nodded with a forced smile. Blood was already dripping from my mouth. I watched her leave the room, and when I felt like she would have walked far, I unleashed my power and burned down the whole base with the rogues included. I watched the rogues roll around in pain. I saw some of them rush toward me, but they were soon caught in fire and fell weakly to the ground. I even saw some vampires trying to escape, only to be burned down by my fire, and I couldn't help but smile, even though I was in a lot of pain myself. Using my ability was draining because of the state I was in, but everything soon came to an end, and I dragged my legs out of the burnt mansion. I returned outside and saw my men waiting for me. He's here. That was the last thing I heard them say before I lost consciousness. Alpha Leo's POV. I could hear voices from afar, but it was hard to pinpoint what they were saying. It seemed very far away that I could only hear voices but not what they were saying. I tried opening my eyes, but all I could see was a blurred picture of my surroundings, although that was enough to make me realize that I was in a room, and I closed them back as it was painful. I heard the door open, and someone came in. The person walked toward me and grabbed my hand. Leo, she called with a trembling voice. She was panicking. Can you hear me? Don't do this to me, please. You need to open your eyes. Can you hear me? She asked, and I nodded my head. I wanted to open my mouth to talk, but it was difficult. My mouth was opening, but no words were coming out, and all I could feel was the pain that kept running through my veins mercilessly. I wanted to open my eyes again, but it was still the same painful. Leo, my mother called again, and I knew I had to respond to her to put her mind at peace. I tried opening my eyes again, and this time, it was easier, and I was able to open my eyes to look at my mother. I saw her smile brightly, and her grip on my hand tightened. "Don't worry, my son. I know you're in pain, and that's why I urged the healers to make sure you are all right. They tried their best, but it was too difficult for them. The poison had done a lot to your body before we were able to bring you home, and all they could do was try their best. Well, I've called Madison and Nora, and they are on their way already. They will soon be here, so stay strong for me, okay?" she said, and I nodded my head again. My head was pounding, and it was with so much difficulty that I was able to nod my head, but I knew I had to do that to reassure her and let her know that I was listening to her. "How is Cynthia and the rest? Are they fine?" I asked her, my voice a low whisper as I tried to force the words out. I felt like my throat was bleeding, and I could taste iron in my mouth, but it felt nice to be able to ask my question, even though it came with so much difficulty. "They are fine. Cynthia came home well, I'm here, and I'm all right. Your other men are all right too. Everyone was safe, thanks to you, and about the rogues, you burnt them all. I'm sure those that remained alive, I mean those that escaped the fire, can't be more than 5. Don't worry about them at all," she replied, and she chuckled. She pressed her hand on my chest as she chuckled again. "Yeah, the entire werewolf kingdom heard about your heroic act, and they've been praising you since then. Your name is everywhere, and you've become a role model among other alphas. You've done well, my son, and I'm so proud of you," she added, and I smiled inwardly. It was nice to hear that the werewolves were singing my praises and would love me more because of this. I felt proud of my achievements, and I realized it wasn't a waste after all. I closed my eyes and opened them again. "How long have I been unconscious?" I asked. My body felt heavy, indicating that it had been a while since I lay here, but the memory in my head seemed so fresh that it felt like it was just for a few hours, confusing me. My mom sighed and held my hand again. "It's 2 days already, Leo. But don't worry, Madison will come and heal you soon, and you will be all right. You know how strong his gift is, right?" she asked, and I nodded my head. I looked around the room and let out a deep breath. I was about to ask my mother when she called Madison and if she told him what happened to me when the door opened, and Ava came in with a glass of water in hand. My eyes widened, and I was in disbelief. I knew I had to be hallucinating because there was no way Ava would show up in front of me after what she did before I departed to rescue my mom and pack members. She also knew she was the cause of my present predicament, so there was no way she would enter my mansion, even if she was shameless. "I must have lost my mind," I said to Ethan and groaned. I had no idea why I thought about her when she did not deserve that much attention from me, but all that was unnecessary. Her eyes caught mine, and she rushed over to me. She dropped the water in her hand on the table and held my hand. "You're awake. Thank you for waking up, thank you for coming back to us," she said to me as she kissed my hand, and my eyes twitched. It wasn't in my head, after all. Ava was truly in the same room as me, and she even had the guts to hold my hand. I felt irritated and disgusted. I had the urge to push her away and warn her not to ever come close to me again, but I held myself back and turned to my mother. "What's she doing here?" I asked with anger in my tone as I looked at my mother, waiting for her reply. My mom seemed surprised, but she shook her head and shrugged. I don't understand what you are saying," she said, and I groaned. What the heck was she doing in my home? Had she always been so shameless? "I know you're angry, Alpha Leo, and I'm sorry. I was angry when you told me about it, which was why I spoke that way to you, and I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to leave without me, but you did, and by the time I returned to tell you that I would go with you, you already left. I tried to connect with you through the mind link, but it wasn't working, and I was bothered about you. It wasn't that I don't care, I want you to know that I was just angry, and I still came back for you, but you already left then, and there was nothing I could do to find out your whereabouts. She explained, but that only annoyed me more. Her excuse wasn't genuine, and it sounded like gibberish to my ears. Her voice was like noise to my ears, and it made me want to cover my ears and chase her out of the room. I looked at her, and my anger grew. Can you leave? I'm done listening to your explanations, so leave already. I said to her, but she shook her head and held my hand tightly. Why don't you understand me? She asked, and the door opened. I turned my head to see who it was, and I was glad when I saw that it was Jason, Cynthia, and some other men who seemed to want to see how I was faring. They all bowed their heads to greet me, and Cynthia seemed to be glad to see me too. She wanted to come to me but stopped when she saw Ava, and I was sure that she did that because she wasn't sure how Ava would react to her this time around. They all walked over to a corner and sat down while my mum went to sit with them. It seemed that they all wanted to give Ava and me a chance to talk, even though they knew there was nothing to talk about between us. I said, "Leave the room," I said to her, but she shook her head again. "I won't. I won't leave until you forgive me, Leo," she said, and I groaned. She was stepping on my nerves and I just wanted to scream at her, force her out of the room, and stay very far away from her. But there were people in the room, and I didn't want to disgrace her more than she already had. Jason stood up and walked over to our side. "Can you please leave now, Ava? My lord is not feeling fine yet, and he shouldn't be bothered at a time like this." "Please leave," Jason said politely as he bowed his head a little, and Ava groaned. I was sure she still had a lot to say, but she held herself back and walked out of the room while I watched her leave with a bitter smile on my face. It was better to lose her now than to lose her when I finally fell in love with her. Seeing that they already left, I turned to look at the rest of the people in the room. "Can you all leave? This room is so small and suffocating. I would like to have some spare time alone," I said to them, and fortunately, they understood and left the room. I tried sitting up in the bed, but it was very difficult as the pain I was going through was too much. The poison must have spread through my body. The door opened, and Ava came in. She walked over to me and looked into my eyes. "I'm sorry, Alpha Leo," she begged, but I shook my head. "I won't forgive you, Ava. And after I survive this, I'm coming to meet you for rejection," I said to her while ignoring the whimpering of my wolf. Alpha Leo's POV: I was asleep when I heard sounds in the room, and I opened my eyes to see who it was that was talking. I smiled when I saw Nora and Madison in the room, staring at me. Nora was the first to notice that I had opened my eyes, and she ran toward me and sat beside me. "You're awake, Alpha Leo," she said excitedly, and I smiled. "Yes, I am. When did you get here?" I asked, and she turned her head to look at Madison, who was also staring at me with a big smile on his face. "We've been here for a while, but you were sleeping. It's nice to see that you are awake and okay," Madison said as he walked over to my side, and I smiled again. It was nice seeing them around, and they made me genuinely happy. Nora looked at me all over and sighed. "I will heal you now," she said, and was about to place her hand on my head when Madison grabbed her hand and shook his head. "I will do that. You're in pain, right, Leo? I'm sure speaking is quite difficult too, right?" he asked, and I felt like laughing, but I still nodded my head as I waited for him to continue, and he returned his attention to Nora. Can you see? He needs a professional healer like me, not lower-class healers like you, girl. He mocked Nora, and I chuckled. Nora removed her hand from his and sneered. We don't need healers like you here either. This is something I can handle, and your help is not needed, okay? She responded, but Madison refused to back down as he shook his head and looked at her. Let me do this, Nora. You are not even strong enough to help him, and you want to do that? He asked, and Nora rolled her eyes before she turned to me. Alpha Leo, don't you agree that I should be the one to heal you? I mean, I know more about healing, even though he is stronger than me, but I'm more careful than him too. What do you think? She asked me, but Madison shook his head immediately and held my hand. No, Leo. You know it's poison, and I'm more skilled in dealing with that than her. I should be the one to heal you because I have the skills, and I will be able to fully heal you. Nora dear, just leave this to me to settle. He said. I watched the two argue for a while longer before I laughed and waved my hand. Laughing was hard for me as my body wouldn't stop aching, but they were just so funny that I couldn't help but laugh because of them. Okay, okay. I should choose a person, right? I asked, and they both nodded. They both looked like kids who were curiously waiting for their mother to share candy with them, and their cuteness was something to laugh about. I started thinking about who to choose, although I already had someone in mind. I should choose Madison. Not because he is more skilled, but because this is poison and it's dangerous. I hope you understand, right? I asked her, and she nodded her head. She looked at Madison, who was already laughing with his hands covering his mouth and staring at her in a teasing way. She pouted, crossed her arms, and returned her gaze to me. I just wanted to help you. You've always been helping me, but I've never been able to do that for you before. She lamented, and I smiled. You being here is helpful enough. Thanks, Nora, I said to her, and she nodded her head. She looked at Madison and rolled her eyes. Better do a good job, she said, and Madison chuckled. I chuckled too and closed my eyes so he could start the healing. He placed his hand on my head, and as usual, I knew he would close his eyes. He stayed there, quietly for a while before I opened my eyes to look at him, and he opened his eyes soon after. You're all right now. I've removed all the poison, and the rest that had entered vital points and can't be removed has been neutralized. I made sure it would never affect you ever and even used some parts of it to nurture your bones, Madison explained to me, and I breathed in relief. You just need to rest for a while, and you will be fully fine again, he added, and I couldn't hide my joy as I smiled weakly. Knowing that I would soon be leaving the bed made me very relieved, and I couldn't wait to see those werewolves who already saw me as their role model and the Council of Werewolves praising me too. All these were in my head when the door opened, and Ava came in. She walked over to me and stood by my side. Are you hungry now? She asked calmly, like a good person that she never was, and I felt irritated. Leave, I said, and I saw her expression darken, but I cared less. Nora seemed to be confused too as she looked at me with confusion in her eyes. What's going on, Alpha Leo? Why do you want her to leave? She asked curiously, and it was obvious it was out of her concern for my relationship. I sucked in a deep breath and looked away. It's complicated, Nora, and she knows she doesn't deserve to be in this room. She is giving me a headache by being here, and I want her out of here, I said to her, and she understood. She stood up from her seat and looked at Ava. Let's go out and talk, she said, and they both walked out of the room. Madison watched them leave the room before he sat on the seat and looked at me with questions in his eyes. "Tell me, is she truly your second chance mate?" he asked, and I nodded my head. I had never introduced Ava to him as my mate because of these things that had been happening between us these days, but it felt good that he knew already, even though my biggest wish at the moment was to reject her and live my life without her. "Yes, she is," I replied, and he smiled. He was quiet for a while before he cleared his throat, and his expression turned serious. "So, what happened? Why are you two fighting so soon?" he asked, and I let out a deep breath. I would have loved to keep the matter to myself, but Madison wasn't someone I could keep something away from. I turned to face him and sighed. "You won't believe that she is like a punishment to me. I've never been happy since I discovered she is my second chance mate simply because her attitude sucks. She made me go to her house to start living with her." I explained to him how she and her friends were smoking and drinking, how she responded to me when I tried to correct her, and finally, I told him about how she refused to help even when my mother was kidnapped. I pleaded with her, "Man. I asked her to help me, but she said she couldn't." I thought she was joking when she said no, but it all became clear to me when she teleported away and never returned. I waited a few minutes for her in my room before I left, but she didn't show up, and even after we took the cars and drove out of the mansion, she still wasn't there. "She is a bad person, Madison, and she doesn't care about me at all," I explained to Madison, who grunted and was quiet for a while. It seemed like he was thinking of what to say for a while, but he finally looked at me and shook his head. "This is bad. Very terrible. How could she do that?" he asked, and I scoffed. I was surprised too at first, but after all this, nothing would surprise me again. "After this, I will end everything with her and reject her too," I told him my plans, but he quickly shook his head and looked at me with disapproval in his eyes. "You shouldn't do that, Leo. Don't let your anger make decisions for you, and I think you should calm down first before making any decision about this matter, okay? You don't even know why the moon goddess chose her to be your second chance mate. She might have a plan for you too." He tried to persuade me, but I had already made up my mind, and it wasn't going to change no matter what. "I don't care, Madison. I will reject her and marry a random lady as my wife. I don't care about a mate or whatsoever anymore, Madison, and I don't think I will ever change my mind either," I replied to him, and that was the truth. "Why don't you calm down first? I don't want you to make a decision you will later regret because it happens a lot. Getting the things that you lost back used to be very difficult, and not everyone is lucky to have such an opportunity. Why don't you calm down and think this through before making any decisions? Trust me, Leo. I'm in support of whatever decision you make after you think over everything again," he said to me, and I sneered. "I'm not going to change my mind, Madison," I replied. I was about to continue when the door opened, and Nora came in. She walked over to my side and sucked in a deep breath. "Can I have a moment with you, please?" she asked, looking at me and indicating that she was talking to me. I nodded my head, and Madison nodded too. He stood up and looked at me again. "Excuse me then. I will be outside," he said and left the room, but I knew he still had a lot to talk about. To him, it felt like I made the decision because of my anger toward Ava, but that was a lie. It's about Ava. She feels guilty and wants to apologize to you. She likes you a lot, Alpha Leo. She is just feeling insecure and scared of your feelings toward her. Why don't you forgive her and give her another chance?" she said, but I could only smile as her words amused me. Insecure? That doesn't sound right, I replied. She will change, Alpha Leo. She told me everything that happened, and I know she was wrong, but she was ready to make things right, and she promised me that she would never do anything that would frustrate you anymore. She is truly ready to change, she said, and I grunted. Alpha Leo's POV, will you think about it? Nora asked me, and I shook my head. Even after I heard her explain to me how Ava felt about me, I still found it hard to imagine myself with Ava ever again. I felt betrayed by her, and the last thing I wanted was to get acquainted with her again. There is nothing to think about, Nora. Ava is someone I should stay away from, and you know this. I'm an alpha, Nora, and just as you know, I have a big pack that I have to look over. Marrying a woman like Ava and making her my Luna will drain me and might make me miserable. Looking over the pack is hard enough, I don't want to add more trouble to my life at all. I replied to her and turned to look away. I was done with the conversation, and I would be glad if she would stop too. While I thought she wasn't going to talk about it anymore, she let out a deep breath that was loud enough to attract my attention, and I frowned. Ava is not a bad woman. She is not, she is a good woman and she isn't the type that will drain you. You should know where Ava is coming from, and you should also know that all her attitude stems from insecurity. If she doesn't like you, she won't be feeling insecure, and she won't misbehave like she did. She was crying when she was explaining everything to me, and do you know what's surprising? She told me everything she did wrong without hiding her faults, and she blamed herself a lot. She felt guilty for what she did and asked me with tears in her eyes that I should help her plead with you. She is nice, Alpha Leo. Nora continued, and I groaned. I looked away again, but I couldn't deny the fact that her words entered my body and broke some of my shells, giving me a lot to think about right then. Will you think about it? She asked that same question again, but this time, I took it differently, and I realized that it was indeed worth thinking about. I realized that I shouldn't make a decision without thinking it through to avoid regret, like Madison said to me earlier. I will think about it, I replied and sighed. Nora clapped her hands and smiled. This is great. I should go and give her the good news, she said and stood up. I turned to look at her, and I forced a smile as I wasn't in the right mind to smile properly. Thanks, Nora, I said to her, and she nodded as she walked toward the door. She was about to leave the room when she stopped and looked back. Should I ask Madison to come stay with you? You will be too bored, staying alone here, she suggested, but I shook my head. One thing that I needed at the moment was a nice nap that would refresh my brain and my body, so I could think well. No, I would like to take a nap. I will let him know when I wake up, I said to her, and she left the room. I stared at the door for a while as I tried to imagine my relationship with Ava, but it was hard. She was someone I had decided to forget about and act like she never existed at all, so bringing myself back to promoting her in my heart again felt somehow awkward, but it was fun to think about. Maybe because I felt like it could only work in my imagination. I was still thinking about her when I started feeling sleepy. I tried to avoid it, but after a few minutes, I was already dozing off, and a few seconds later, I had fallen asleep. I had no idea how long I slept, but I woke up later and I felt thirsty. Well, that was the reason I woke up. I was thirsty. I looked at the table beside my bed, but the water wasn't there, and I groaned. I struggled to stand up to get it myself as no one was there to help me. I had just sat up in bed when I looked at my left-hand side, and I was surprised to see Ava sitting there. She was staring at me with a concern-filled gaze, and my eyes twitched. What are you doing here? The last time I remembered, I told her not to stay in the same room with me, and I sent her away the second time too, so I expected her to stay away from me, but what was she doing in my room? She smiled softly and stood up. She poured me some water and walked over to my side to hand the water over to me. I looked at the water in her hand and rolled my eyes. I had no interest in collecting the water from her, so I just ignored her there until I turned to look at her again, and I realized she was still holding the water there even after so many minutes. I collected the water from her and drank it, after which I returned the glass to her, and she went to drop it before returning to me. She knelt at my side and lowered her head. I'm sorry. I feel so sorry for everything I did to you. I know I went too far, and it pains me to know that I've made you feel like I'm the worst woman out there. You know I'm not bad, and you know the kind of person I am. I'm sorry for everything I did, and I want you to know that I care about you a lot. She explained to me solemnly, and I was shocked. I couldn't believe that the same lady who was acting all high and mighty a few hours ago was the same one kneeling before me and begging me. It was weird, and I was surprised, but that didn't stop me from still seeing her the same way I did. You are a good woman? Who told you that? Any good woman wouldn't do what you did, and they wouldn't come here pretending to be the victim like you are doing right now. You don't love me, Ava, and with the way you acted toward me, it was obvious that you wanted rejection too. Why are you pretending as if you care when you don't? I questioned, anger obvious in my tone as I glared at her. It wasn't like that at all. The smoking scene you saw then wasn't real. I do drink, but I don't smoke. I can drink a lot, but I will never smoke. You can ask a lot of people around me, and they will tell you the same thing. What you saw that day was an act put up by me to see how you would react. I wanted to see if you would care or not, or more like I wanted to provoke you to know if you like me or not. I'm so sorry. She apologized, and I rolled my eyes. I wanted to believe her and return everything to the way it was, but it was hard, and no matter how hard I tried, it wasn't easy to forgive her and let it go like that. I tried standing up from the bed, but I fell back onto the bed and groaned out loud. Arg! I groaned again as I grabbed my forehead and closed my eyes tightly, indicating how much pain I was in. What's it? Are you okay? What's wrong? Ava kept asking with a panicked voice. She stood up from the floor and looked at me with fear in her eyes. Talk to me, please, what's wrong? She questioned as she started checking my body. My legs. My legs are hurting so much that I feel like they're breaking apart. It's so painful. I cried as she started panicking. She ran to the other side of the room and returned before picking up her phone to call someone, but she dropped it again and ran her fingers through her hair. She was nervous and had no idea what she was supposed to do. Well, that was the look on her face. Help! Help, please! She shouted, and the door opened the next second, revealing Madison, Nora, Cynthia, and my mother, who seemed to have been lurking around for a while, probably listening to my conversations with Ava. What's wrong? Madison was the first to rush toward me and asked Ava. His legs. It seems his body isn't clean yet and it's affecting him a lot. Please, help. Ava begged desperately and I sucked in a deep breath. Pain? I cleared everything earlier, and it's strange that he is feeling this pain, but I will check to find out what caused it. With that being said, Madison moved closer to my legs and placed his hand on my right leg. This, he mumbled with closed eyes while shaking his head. I'm fine, Madison, but I want you to play along with me. I said to him through a mind link. I was expecting him to ask for the reason, but he didn't, and I felt elated. The poison is in his legs and it needs to be treated. He lied, and I felt like laughing. Nora moved forward and pressed her hand on my legs too. Play along, Nora. There is something I must find out. I said to her, and she agreed too. Madison turned to face everyone else in the room with a sad look playing on his face. He hesitated for a moment before he opened his mouth to speak. Leo is paralyzed, he announced. Alpha Leo's POV. I made sure I lock up and block my emotions, so Ava won't be able to sense my emotions and notice anything. My eyes widened in pretense. I shook my head in disbelief, and my lips trembled. What? What did you just say? My voice cracked as I asked him with a fearful tone and looked into his eyes as if I was begging him to tell me it was a lie. Madison looked back at me and shook his head. I don't know. I don't understand what's going on, Leo. I thought you were okay, but I don't know why this is happening. I'm confused, he said, and he indeed looked confused. He walked toward the door and returned while groaning with sadness in his tone. I should try healing you again, he said and returned to my side. Madison closed his eyes and placed his hands on my legs. He kept muttering some words under his breath, and at that moment, I felt cool and refreshed. It was so good that I closed my eyes to savor the feeling and only opened them back when I realized he was done. I looked at him, and he looked back at me. That was cool, yeah? I saw you close your eyes as if you were enjoying it, he said to me through the mind link, and I laughed inwardly. He turned to face Ava and shook his head. It's not working. Nothing is working, he said to the already frozen Ava. Ava dragged her feet forward with her eyes running around my body. She was shaking her head in disbelief, and her eyes kept twitching. I can't believe this. How can this happen? He was just fine a few minutes ago, and he is like this now? How can this be possible? She questioned as she finally got closer to me and held my hand in hers. This can't be happening, she mumbled, and in the next seconds, she turned to face Madison and questioned. I thought you healed him, and you told us that he is okay. You said you removed all the poison and even neutralized the ones that can't be removed. So, what happened? What's this? Her tone was harsh and interrogating. She was angry, and I knew at that moment that Madison wouldn't be okay with any disrespect from her, but I was sure he wouldn't blow everything over either. Madison was quiet for a while before he sighed. He sure wasn't okay with her tone, but he was doing well by keeping it in and acting as if it was all real. I thought so too. I tried my best to remove it all and neutralize the rest, but I didn't know that the poison was so tricky that the ones I thought I neutralized would end up making him paralyzed. I'm so confused myself, he replied to her, and Ava's expression changed. She moved closer to Madison and stood right in front of him. You don't know? You are confused? Why? Why are you confused? Why didn't you just tell us you couldn't do it instead of doing it and ruining it all? Why didn't you tell us that your capability isn't high enough to get rid of the poison instead of giving us false hope? She questioned with anger in her voice. She stared closely at Madison for a while before her lips curved up, and she smirked. Oh, did you do this on purpose? You were trying to take revenge, right? I know you hate him for competing with you over Nora, but how could you do this to him? How could you ruin him like this just because you are angry? You, she continued blaming and insulting Madison, but Nora stopped her. Nora raised her hand and pulled Madison back. Standing in front of Ava, she looked straight into her eyes with anger in her eyes. Shut up, Ava. How dare you say such words to Lord Madison? How dare you talk to him in that tone? Have you forgotten that he is a lord and not a rag you can wipe your hands with? Nora questioned angrily and moved even closer to her. I know you are angry about this whole matter, but are you the only one who is angry? No. You ain't, and that doesn't give you the right to talk to my husband that way. Nora shouted back at Ava. Ava rolled her eyes. I can talk to him however I want because Alpha Leo is my mate, and he is the one who made him like this. He is not an amateur, so how could he make such a mistake? Is it even sensible to your ears? She asked angrily and rudely. Her voice was so rude that Nora's face became flushed, and she got truly angry. She clenched her fist and growled. If you dare talk to my husband anyhow again, I swear I will make you regret it for the rest of your life. I will stop thinking about Alpha Leo, I will forget about the fact that you are his mate, and I will make you miserable. I will make you regret it, Ava. Nora threatened, and my heart shook violently. I had never seen Nora this annoyed before. Even when Madison offended her then, she was never this angry, and then it dawned on me that Nora was already in her possessive mode, and she had lost her reasoning. She had forgotten about anything else, and the only thing she could think about was her mate. I was scared that my plan would cause trouble and ruin everything, but what could I do? While I was still thinking of a way, my mother walked forward and sucked in a deep breath. Can you two just keep quiet and stop shouting? Look at Leo in the bed. He is crying. Do you think this is what you should be doing right now? Do you think it's the right time to be fighting when he is in so much pain? She asked, and the two ladies turned their heads to look at me, and their eyes widened when they saw tears in my eyes. From the moment my mother butted in, I had forced out tears from my eyes, and it had trickled down my face, so when they looked at me, I turned away as if I was embarrassed, and I knew they would feel guilty, or should I say just Ava since Nora knew the truth. You should leave the room, I think you need to give him some space. My mother said to them, and Nora sighed. Ava shook her head and moved closer to me. I will stay with him. She said. You can't. You need to leave. I will stay with my son myself. My mother replied angrily, and Ava's face fell. Nora had already left the room, so Ava followed soon after, and they both left the room. I will go and check on Nora, Madison said to me, and I nodded before he left the room too. Everyone else left except my mother, and she walked over to my side. What made you come up with this plan, Leo? Who are you acting for? My mother asked, and my eyes widened. Did she know? What are you talking about, Mum? I questioned, and she smiled. I know you are acting, Leo. Nothing's wrong with you, my mother said, and I smiled. How did you know? I questioned. You think I won't? I'm your mother, Leo, and I understand you more than anyone, my mother replied, and my smile widened. She moved closer to me and sat down. So, how long will you keep doing this? And why are you pretending like this? She asked, and I knew she was curious. I looked at the door and tried to sense if Ava was around, but she wasn't, and I breathed in relief. I'm doing it to know if Ava likes me or not. I want to know her heart and see if she will run away or not, I replied, and she frowned. What if she ran away? She asked, and I smiled bitterly. Then, that will be fine. I would rather stay single than marry someone who doesn't love me, I replied firmly, and she nodded her head in agreement. For how long will you keep this up? She asked, and I fell into deep thought. I had only planned everything, but I hadn't thought about when it would end at all. A week? Maybe a few days, I replied without thinking much about it. It would all end when Ava ran away anyway. I will keep pretending as if I'm angry at her and continue to push her away from me. I will see if she will run away or stay, whatever way, I won't regret anything, I said to my mother, who let out a deep breath. I'm not sure what to think about this plan of yours, Leo. It's somehow, she stopped and sighed. She stood up and dropped my hand. I should give you time to rest, she said and walked to the door. She was about to open the door when she looked back at me. Be careful, she said, and left the room. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Ava walked in. She came closer to me and sucked in a deep breath. I'm sorry that I lost my composure and made some noise in front of you instead of comforting you. I just don't know how to feel about the mistake he made. Why did it turn out this way? She asked, and I sighed. I don't know, Ava, and I don't want to talk about it. It pains me to think about it, I replied and looked away. I was trying my best to stay calm and act cold as much as I could. She was quiet for a while before she cleared her throat to attract my attention. Shouldn't we invite another healer? Should I call someone? She suggested, but I shook my head. That won't be necessary. I've called one, and he will soon be here, I told her. While we were still talking, the door opened, and a lady walked in with Mother. She walked over and bowed her head. Hello, Alpha Leo, she greeted politely. Yeah, welcome. Quickly check my legs, I said to her. Madison had told me through the mind link that he arranged a healer who would play well by our rules. He told me that the healer wouldn't disappoint us, and seeing her like that, I realized that he was right. I'm fine, but you need to say that I'm paralyzed. I'm sure Madison already explained everything to you, right? I said to her through the mind link. Yes, Lord Madison already told me everything, and I understand, she replied and closed her eyes. She placed her hand on my legs and started her healing process, but she soon opened her eyes and frowned. This is bad. The poison has run too deep and can't be retrieved, she replied, and my eyes widened. No! I screamed, and the door opened. Madison and Nora rushed in. I screamed again and tried to stand up from the bed, but Madison and Nora pressed me back to the bed. No, Leo! Don't do this! Just lay right here, please, Madison begged, but I shook my head in disagreement. No, no! I can't believe I have lost my legs. I can't walk anymore, I cried and growled. You all should leave. I want to be alone, I said to them. Nora and Madison moved back, but Ava did not move at all. She seemed to want to stay. Acting furious, I stretched out my hands and flames appeared on them. If you don't leave now, I will release this flame and burn you all in this darn room. I yelled, and they all scurried out of the room. Looking at the door after they left, I laughed hard as I sprung my body widely on the bed. It was fun, and I enjoyed it. The only thing that remained was Ava making a decision that would either build or break our future. Nora's POV. We were in the guest room when Madison moved closer to me and put his hand across my shoulder. Are you still angry about earlier? He asked with a smile on his face, and I smiled back before shaking my head. No, Madison. I'm not angry. I was just annoyed with the way she was talking to you earlier, but it's okay now, I replied and sighed. But now that I think about it, I can understand why she reacted that way because I would have done the same if you were the one in Alpha Leo's shoes. I just lost my mind then because I wasn't okay with her saying such things to my mate while I was there. I added, and he nodded his head, indicating that he understood me. He removed his hand from my shoulder and relaxed his back. About Leo's plan, do you think it's right? He asked, and I fell into deep thought. I thought about how it would feel if Madison did the same to me, and I thought about what I must have done to make him do that. I also thought about how excited he would be if I passed the test, and a smile appeared on my face. Yes, it's good if it's not too much. I mean, Alpha Leo needs to trust Ava again, and to do that, she needs to pass this test. That's the only way they can be happy with each other, I replied, and he nodded his head without saying a word. He was quiet for a while before he let out a deep breath. I think Ava loves Leo. I can see it in her eyes and the way she acts around him. She loves him a lot, he mumbled, and I agreed with him because I felt like he was right, as I could feel the same thing from Ava. Yeah, I think you're right. I can see it too. I guess she was doing all those things because she felt insecure. Maybe she felt like Alpha Leo would never love her. Then, about Alpha Leo and me too, I think our friendship is not working well with her, I replied and sighed. Ava didn't like me, and I knew this. She must have disliked me because I was friends with Alpha Leo, and I even knew about her visiting Madison to ruin my marriage by telling him that I kissed Alpha Leo. I was supposed to hate her for that, but then, I knew she was just being protective of her man. While we were talking, I looked around for my son, but he wasn't around, and I frowned. The last time I saw him was when we entered the mansion, and since then, he had run away somewhere that I had no idea about. Oops! You've been so careless with your son, woman, Lolita mocked, and I rolled my eyes as I continued looking around. What's it? What are you searching for? Madison seemed to notice my confusion, and he spoke up. I turned toward him and made a guilty look. I felt guilty for forgetting about my son for such a long time. Where is Julius? I asked after calming myself 1,000 times. I had to tell myself to be brave and speak up before I could finally do it, and I was glad I did. Julius? He asked and looked around too before he turned to me. He's with Lady Christabel downstairs. He is playing with her, he said to me, and only then did I breathe a sigh of relief. I felt glad that he knew where he was after all. I stood up and smiled. I will go check on him. I will be back, I said, and he nodded. With that, I walked away and took the stairs. I walked down the stairs as quickly as I could to see my son, and I saw him chatting excitedly with Lady Christabel. The two were asking each other questions and answering with big smiles on their faces. So, you mean you haven't started schooling here even now? She asked Julius, who nodded his head. Yes, Mum and Dad have been busy making up, but Dad promised that he would enroll me in school the moment school resumes in 4 days from now, Julius replied, and I could feel his curiosity. He couldn't wait to start school again. Wow! This is great! Which school would you like to go? Do you have anyone in mind? Lady Christabel asked him, but he shook his head. I will go to anyone that my dad puts me. I will be okay there because I know he will choose the best for me, Julius replied, and Lady Christabel chuckled. You're such a wise child, she complimented, and Julius smiled. So, how's Alpha Leo right now? Is he feeling better? He asked Lady Christabel, who nodded her head with a smile. Yes, he's totally fine now, and soon, you will be able to see him, she replied. Really? Julius asked excitedly. I watched them converse for a while with a smile on my face. I thought they would notice my presence, but the two were so into their conversation that they had no idea that someone was standing by the stairs, staring at them. I turned around to look for Ava, but she wasn't around, and I frowned. I walked toward Lady Christabel and Julius. "Hello." I called gently to attract their attention, and it worked as they both turned their heads to look at me, and we chuckled. "Where's Ava? I can't find her around, or is she with Alpha Leo?" I questioned, but Lady Christabel shook her head and sighed deeply. "No, she is in the garden," she replied, and I made an "oh" sound. "Can you help me to check up on her? I don't know what she's doing there, and I don't want to leave my baby alone," she explained, and I nodded. "I will be back," I said and waved to Julius before leaving the room. I walked to the garden where I saw Ava sitting with her back turned. Her shoulders kept moving, and she seemed to be wiping something off her face every second too. Was she crying? I rushed toward her and turned her to face me, but my eyes widened when I saw the tears in her eyes. She was crying so bitterly that all her makeup had smudged already. I let out a deep breath and sat beside her. I felt sad to see her crying this much when the whole thing wasn't true, to begin with. It was a plan to see if she could be trusted or not, but she was crying so much that it made me feel guilty that I was part of that plan that made another woman so sad like this. Still drowning in my thoughts, I turned to look at her, and I sucked in a deep breath. "It's okay. Don't cry so hard, everything will be fine," I said to her, and she turned her head to look at me. She opened her mouth to say something, but more tears kept rushing out of her eyes, and in the end, she had to keep quiet and continued crying. "It's okay," I pleaded, trying to make her stop crying. She looked at me again and pulled closer to me. I was thinking about what she was going to do, but she only rested her head on my shoulder, and I sighed. She needed comfort. I hugged her and started stroking her hair as she continued crying in my arms. I tried consoling her a lot more times, but she continued crying. She cried and cried for a while before she finally stopped, but I continued to hug her to fully calm her down. She stayed in my arms for a little longer before she pulled away and wiped her face. We were both quiet for a while as we let the breeze cool our minds. Ava turned to me again and sighed. "I'm sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have talked to Lord Madison that way," she apologized, and I smiled softly. "It's okay. I understand. I would have acted the same way if I was the one, so don't worry. What are you planning to do now?" I asked her, changing the conversation from what had passed. She lowered her head and shook her head. "I don't know. I'm not bothered about myself, but about Alpha Leo, who must be in a lot of pain right now. He is an alpha, and he has a lot to do, but if he can't walk, how will he do them all? I want to share his pains with him, but I can't because he blocked me from doing that. I can't even feel his agony at the moment, and it's tearing my heart apart," she explained as tears rolled down her eyes again. "I feel like he might want to commit suicide. I'm so scared that he might want to do that," she added, and I could see fear in her eyes. She was scared, very scared about Alpha Leo killing himself because of too much pain and sadness. I shook my head. I felt the urge to tell her at that moment that it was all a lie, but I kept it to myself and frowned. "That's not possible," I replied. "Did you see how angry he was then? He couldn't control his anger. He is very sad," she lamented, and I sighed. "I'm sure he won't do such a thing if you stay by his side, Ava. He will want to stay alive if you show him enough love and care, especially when he is like this now," I advised, and she nodded her head. "I will make sure to do that. I won't leave his side no matter what. I will stay by his side, and even if he pushes me away, I will stubbornly stay back and let him know how much I love him," she professed, and I smiled. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates. link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.